Part 3, Chapter 10. That's a lot of ships. The party aboard the Berserker goes on for what feels like forever to the crew of the Ghost. Eventually, the Butcher docks with the massive battleship, picking up its captain, and the order is given to get underway. Folleck's soul wasn't lying about his ship. It looks like the Ghost in the most superficial of ways, but her engines are more significant, and her forward weapons, both those on the engine nacelles and above and behind the bridge, are much fiercer looking. Add to that a much sleeker overall appearance, and the Butcher looks like a much meaner vessel than the Ghost. As Will brings the ship out of FTL, Bennie complains. It didn't look that far on the holomap. Maybe it wasn't to scale, Will says, looking over the tactical map showing on the main screen at the front of the bridge. Wow, that's a lot of ships, right? He looks at Cynthia, who's taken up residence at an unused bridge station directly behind Will's command and pilot station. She just shrugs and goes back to filing one of her claws, with a large metal file Will is sure came from engineering. Zephyr nods. More than Xarrix mentioned, that's for sure. She looks down at her console. Incoming comm, it's Xarrix. She taps a control and Xarrix's voice enters the bridge. I'm transmitting your assignment now. It'll include the ships you are to protect and patrol routes you're to fly. Your primary objective is ensuring that the salvage teams can come and go between the derelicts safely. How hot is this area? Will asks. I didn't even know there was anything here. How could anyone else? Excluding Jarilla, of course. Far as I can tell, we're light years from the nearest trade route or system. Xarrix smiles tightly. Our client's organization isn't as airtight as, say, my own. She believes word may have gotten out. He looks past Will to Cynthia. Make sure our best interests are looked after. The Tigran looks up, making a purring noise. Of course. The screen goes black, then switches back to the tactical overview of the region of space the Ghost is in. Will presses a control, changing the view to the forward sensors. The display now shows at least 100 ships drifting at odd angles to one another. Weirder still, they're all nearly identical, Will comments to no one in particular. You're right, Maxim confirms from his station, looking down at his tactical scanners. They're not all the same size or mass, but design-wise they're nearly identical. He looks over at Zephyr. Have you ever seen a ship like this? His companion consults her own displays briefly, before answering, shaking her head. No, nothing like these are in the database, at least not that I could find. They're so beautiful. She looks at the main display, where the massive green flattened egg shapes are floating on screen. Each ship is at least half a kilometer long, with many coming in at nearly 2. There aren't any discernible engines to indicate which is the front or back of the vessel. Cynthia clears her throat. Very pretty, yes. We should get going. Look. She gestures to the lower corner of the main display, where the salvager ships they've been assigned to protect are on the move. Don't want to fail in the first talk of your assignment, right? She grins. Standing up, she adds, I'll be in the lounge. The mix of freighters and tugs moves as a unit towards what Will assumes is a randomly selected ship. The tugs begin using bucking cables to pull themselves against the giant ship's hulls. I really don't like her, Zephyr growls. I don't know. I'm warming up to her, Bennie says, hopping out of his chair. I'll be in the lounge. Maxim makes a face. Explains why there are so many Brelak in the galaxy. Will and Zephyr both laugh. Then Will turns his attention to the main display and his flight controls. I'll keep us 100 or so kilometers from the derelict, per Xarrix's instructions. Zephyr, can you reach out and let them know? Roger that. I wonder why he didn't want us to get too close to the ships, she asks. I wonder the same, Will says. By the way, Max, keep an eye on the Butcher. I don't trust that little Lucky Charms motherfucker as far as I can throw him. Lucky Charms? Maxim asks, then shakes his head. Never mind, and I concur. I read up on Folleck's soul, or at least as much as possible, as his public record is pretty light. Before we departed, I reached out to a friend in the Peacekeepers, And since I'm no longer a felon and traitor, he did me a favor and sent over Saul's Peacekeeper file, which is considerably more detailed. Will turns to his big friend. And when exactly were you going to mention this to me? Maxim shrugs. Now? Will tuts. What have you got? Zephyr crosses the bridge hatch, where she presses a control on the panel next to it. The panel turns red. She looks at Will. Just in case our cat ninja comes back. Maxim works his console, bringing up a Peacekeeper file on the main display. In the top right corner is a picture of Follick's soul. Lorath wasn't exaggerating when she told you what he's been up to. He's wanted on 7 worlds the Peacekeepers have contracts with, for offenses ranging from extortion to attempted genocide. He scrolls the file on the display up. He's also wanted in several of the unincorporated areas, particularly Flad de Nor, for crimes against the people, whatever that means. Damn, Will says, reading as the file continues to scroll. This is one seriously evil leprechaun. Maxim and Zephyr exchange a look, then both shrug. Bennie plops down on the sofa next to Cynthia. So, looks like we'll be sitting around with time to kill. What do your people like to do for fun? If Bralek had eyebrows, his would be waggling, but since they don't, just his green eyelids bouncing up and down. The feline-featured assistant criminal leers at Bennie. I don't think you could handle what I like for fun. Resting his small green hand on her light brown furred hand, he murmurs, Why don't we find out? Spaghetti Factory. So they'll start tomorrow? Maxim asks, sitting at the kitchenette table. Everyone, including Cynthia, is present. Yes, according to the captain of the Hufflo, their initial inspection shows several places they think they can dock and cut through the hole. The Plo has most of their equipment, so they want to make sure it can dock. Will looks over at Cynthia. Have you heard from Lorath about the other team? They have anything yet? Taking her fork and spinning it, she looks down at the mass of noodles on her plate. Lifting the fork, she eyes the mass. About the same. The Arabi is the lead ship of their salvager group. They scanned one of the smaller vessels, found a few places they think they can cut in. She leans down and takes a bite of her spaghetti, biting off the noodles that linger on the fork, letting them drop to the plate, red sauce staining the fur on her chin. Needs meat, she says, licking her lips and sizable incisors. Maxim leans in, helping himself to a second helping. This is quite good. Not as good as tacos, but a close second. Go easy on the parm. That's the last tube, Will says, pointing to the tall green cylinder of 100% grated Parmesan cheese in Maxim's hand. It's quite good. You should have gotten more when you went home. The big Pelorian set the container back on the table. I didn't know I'd be feeding so many, Will says, scooping up a bit more of the noodles and rich red sauce. Cynthia watches all this. How long has it been since you went back to your home world? Will sets his fork down. I guess it's been 4 years now, give or take. Why? Just wondering. That's a long time to be away from home. He doesn't have a choice, Zephyr growls, then takes a bite of spaghetti as Maxim rests a hand on her leg under the table. At his touch, some of her tension drains away. Oh, I knew you were the only one. Xarrix mentioned your people being pretty primitive. If that's the case, how are you here, flying this ship? Surely the Peacekeepers are still patrolling primitive pre-contact systems? She looks at Zephyr, who nods. Will smiles sadly. Long story. Maybe I'll tell it to you one day. You know, when you're not a sort of evil overseer watching my every move. Cynthia purrs, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, then raises her glass in a toast, smiling, her lips stuck on her incisors. From across the table, Zephyr growls again. I'm not hungry. She gets up and storms out of the lounge. Maxim looks at her retreating back, then at Will and Cynthia, then back to where the hatch to the crew quarters is closing behind Zephyr. He gets up and follows. Bennie reaches across the table for Maxim's plate. More for the rest of us, he says, dumping the contents of Maxim's plate on his. He's right. You really should have gotten more of this Parmesan cheese. Parmesan, Will corrects, then looks at Cynthia. So, how does someone like you get stuck working for someone like Xarrix? She grins.
Someone like me? Like me how?
Will blushes slightly. I mean, you seem intelligent. And hot, Bennie interrupts. Ouch! He jerks as if struck, then glares at Will. Don't you have someplace to be? Will asks, looking at Gabe, who's been standing silently, as usual, off to the side of the dining area. Taking the hint, Gabe says,
Indeed, we have a series of diagnostics to run on the main computer.
No, we don't, Bennie says, around a mouthful of spaghetti. He gives another jerk, like someone has kicked him, and he glares. I swear to Noblar, do that again. Gabe comes over and takes Bennie's plate.
Come along. We have things to do that aren't here. You can eat there.
He turns and starts to leave, Bennie's dinner in one hand. Bennie lets out a growl-like noise, turns to Will and glares, then hops out of the seat and follows Gabe. As they near the hatch leading to engineering, Will can hear him complain. You said I couldn't eat in engineering anymore.
I will make an exception this one time,
the tall droid says, looking back at Will and Cynthia, now alone in the lounge.
I think he thinks you and he are competing for my affections,
Cynthia says in a low voice, smiling behind her drink. Will feels his face warm. Are we? His face feels so hot, he's sure it must be red as a beetroot.
You're kind of horrible at this,
Cynthia laughs, scooting closer to him on the bench. So yeah, you never answered my question, he protests weakly.
About how I ended up working for Xarrix? It's not that interesting a story, really. I was working for Lorath as her second, in an extortion racket in one of the larger night markets on Fury, when Xarrix took notice and absorbed her operation. Rather than get herself killed, she became his second, and I stayed on as hers.
Will jumps slightly, feeling a hand on his thigh. He says, a few octaves higher than normal. When I met you, you were her secretary.
A convenient cover. I set out there in case any nosy officials or anyone else popped their head in. We didn't get many visitors, and those we did, we were usually expecting. Like you.
She smiles broadly, her very sharp-looking incisors gleaming.
Though, I'll admit, we weren't expecting the Peacekeepers to be following you.
He affects a stricken look. Hey, they weren't following me. They raided you separately. The pressure on his leg moves up slightly.
Uh-huh,
she says, smiling slyly. Movie night.
The Hufflo is docking now,
reports Zephyr, looking up from her screen to the image on the main display. On it, several of the small salvage vessels have latched themselves on to one of the larger derelicts. The larger Plo is also sliding into position alongside the derelict, guided by the smaller tugs. I guess now we wait, Will says, spinning in his chair. How's the B team doing?
According to scans, about the same. Their salvagers have just docked. Pass me more of that. What did you call it? Popcorn?
Cynthia says, reaching across Will, who's next to her on the sofa in the lounge. Maxim is on her other side, while Zephyr next to him. Gabe, now that his frame shares proportions similar to his crewmates, is in the large chair next to the sofa. He takes the popcorn from Bennie, who has taken to sitting on the arm of the chair when Gabe joins them, and with a series of clicks and slight whirs extends his arm several feet, over to Cynthia, who is staring wide-eyed.
I didn't know you could do that,
she says in awe. Will shakes his head, smiling. Neither did we. Gabe is full of surprises lately. He presses a button on his wristcom, and the movie pauses. Where'd you pick that up? Gabe retracts his arm, which makes soft clicking sounds as it settles back into place. He lifts his hand to inspect it, rotating it 180 degrees.
As I mentioned on Fury, I have been experimenting with this new body. The design I based myself on Seems to be tremendously adaptable.
Shrugging, he adds.
There is, however, no instruction manual.
Cynthia leers at the engineering bot.
Exactly how adaptable are we talking here?
She raises her eyebrows, her feline ears twitching. Down, girl, Will says, resting a hand on her knee. From the other side of Maxim, there's a low rumble. Will presses the control on his wrist comm and the movie returns. Bennie leans forward.
So, this is called what again?
Without taking his eyes off the screen, Will answers. Ghostbusters. Zephyr reaches over and takes the popcorn from Cynthia.
I like that the main characters are all women.
Cynthia nods, which only irritates Zephyr. Will nods. There's an older version, it's just as great. We can watch it next movie night and you guys can compare. I like this one a lot, but both are pretty awesome.
What is the role the blonde male serves?
Cynthia asks.
I mean, he is quite attractive for a human, but he seems mentally deficient.
He's the secretary, or I guess he's supposed to be. I think they intentionally made him dumb as a brick as a bit of social commentary, Will explains.
I see,
Cynthia replies, thinking. She turns to Will.
I prefer brown hair.
Her grin highlights her sharp incisors. Maxim coughs once, then gestures to the screen. Those weapons look quite powerful. On screen, one of the characters is destroying an alleyway with her out-of-control weapon. This is, what did you call it? Slapstick? Will clears his throat, reaching for his drink. Oh, yeah, more or less. Physical comedy like this was pretty popular when this movie came out. I was pretty young, but the main characters were in several movies with similar antics. Oh, there's a funny dance sequence in this too.
I do not understand why in the middle of battle anyone would choose to dance,
Gabe remarks. Bennie shakes his head.
This is a comedy, sort of like Quiznar and the Wonkins, but with humans. I see,
Gabe says, his face now more emotive than before.
And ghosts,
Bennie offers.
I was an engineering bot on a Peacekeeper command carrier. I did not watch entertainment vids. Didn't the engineers have a break room?
Zephyr asked. Gabe nods.
Droids were not allowed in the break room.
Everyone finds something else to look at. On the screen, two of the characters are now dressed all in black, doing an interpretive dance. Gabe stands.
I will be in engineering.
Always with the secrets.
First derelict looks like it's on the move,
Zephyr reports. On the screen, the derelict the Hufflo had been docked with is lurching slightly and moving off toward a section of space near the Berserker. Jarilla wants each ship to take up a position around her flagship once it's online. The newly reactivated vessel is moving like its pilot is drunk. From her now usual spot at one of the aft stations on the bridge, Cynthia's wristcom beeps. She looks down.
Go ahead, Lorath,
she says. There is a pause.
1 second.
She stands, looks at Will, then Zephyr, then leaves the bridge. As the hatch closes, Will looks over at Bennie, who has already turned in his seat, waiting for Will to look at him. He nods. Bennie grins and turns back to his console. Will taps a few controls on his chair, and one of the smaller displays on his console comes to life. A wireframe of the ship appears, with a blinking yellow dot moving down the long corridor that connects the forge section of the ship to the larger main body. They watch as the dot moved all the way to Cynthia's quarters.
Why the sexy flobbing?
Bennie mumbles. Everyone turns to Bennie. Will says, I'm sorry, what now? Bennie looks up. She has a scrambler, a good one in her quarters. He looks at the ceiling, mimicking Will's habit.
Gabe, can you help us with this? What do you need?
The ceiling asks.
There's a scrambler in use in Cynthia's quarters.
From the overhead speakers.
Of course, 1 moment.
Bennie turns his attention back to his console, mumbling a little here and there. Then Gabe is back on the speakers.
Did that help?
Bennie smiles.
It did, yeah. Well, at least a little.
He presses a button. The speakers come to life.
Let them find out.
Something, some garbled back and forth.
Biotech Warfare Division will pay handsomely.
This is followed by a burst of static. Will looks over at Bennie, who is frantically working at his console.
Do what you have to do,
A little more static.
Xarrix doesn't care.
Then Cynthia's voice.
I can take care of it.
Zephyr is staring at Bennie.
That's it? Seriously, what do we even keep you around for?
Harsh, Maxim says, under his breath. Grolac off, Bennie shouts.
If I'd known she had a scrambler, I could have planned for it. Will, you didn't see anything like that last night or the night before?
Come again? Zephyr says, turning slowly to face Will. The look on her face a cross between betrayal and disgust, but mostly disgust. Will can feel the heat rising from his neck to his cheeks. No, didn't see anything, but also don't know what a scrambler looks like, so, there's that. He turns to fully face Bennie. And fuck you, dude, not cool. Maxim is trying and failing to stifle his laughter. Zephyr is staring at Will, her mouth hanging open. Will spins his chair back to face Zephyr and Maxim. Okay, moving on. He looks at Maxim, deadpan. Maxim is still trying really hard not to fall over laughing. But the ex-peacekeeper just rests one hand on his console, shaking his head a few times, then looks at Will and gives him what Will knows is the Plorian equivalent of a thumbs up. Moving on. What was all that? Biotech division? Who's? Do whatever it takes. Does she have a weapon on board? I searched her and her belongings when she came aboard, Maxim offers, then grins at Will. I suppose I could have let you search her, more thoroughly. He chuckles. Will flips him off. Did anyone search her when she came from the Berserker last time? Zephyr looks at Maxim, who is now dead serious. Both shake their heads. Will looks at Bennie, who stares back at him, face completely blank. That's a no, then.
I hate that flobbin',
Zephyr mumbles. She looks at Will.
We can talk about your life choices later.
Will grimaces, then looks at the ceiling. Gabe?
Yes, Captain.
Scan.
What's going on? Is something wrong?
Cynthia says, as she walks on the bridge and hears Will. In the confusion and embarrassment, he hadn't noticed her leave her quarters and begin walking back to the bridge. None of them had. The outer hull. See if you can pick up the source of the weird lag I see on the starboard maneuvering thrusters. A pause, then.
Of course, Captain. Is the ship okay?
The feline-featured maybe assassin asks, taking her seat. Will nods his head. Oh yeah, but since we're just sitting here, I figured I'd have him check out the weirdness I've been noticing. How's Lorath over on the SS Lilliput? The Tigran woman makes a face, then waves her hand.
She's fine. We had to discuss some business we left behind on Fury.
She grins, showing her impressive incisors again.
Work never stops,
Don't I ever, Will says, turning back to look down at his console.